Sketches of character fashionable notorieties modern philosophy the man of genius, and the buck, a short life. And a merry one, a short s, on John Long's long, Cork's long, Bill's long, credits long-winded customers the ancients and the moderns. A contrast by old crony. Ye bucks who in manners, dress, fashion, and shiny, so often have hailed me as lord of your gang, oh lend me your ears. Whilst I deign to relate the cause of my splendor, the way to be great, my own checkered life condescend to unfold, and give a receipt of more value than gold, reveal ye the spot where the graces all dwell, and point out the path like myself to excel. Pursuits of fashion only contrive to obtain the character of an eccentric, and you may ride the free horse round the circle of your acquaintance for the remainder of your life. If my readers are not by this time fully satisfied of my peculiar claims to the appellation of an oddity, I have no hopes of obtaining pardon for the past whims and fancies of a volatile muse, or anticipating patronage for the future wanderings of a restless and inquisitive humorist. But my bookseller, a steady, persevering, inflexible sort of personage, whose habits of business are as rigid as a citizen of the last century, or a Puritan of the Cromwell Commonwealth, has lately suffered the marble muscles of his frigid countenance to unbend with a sort of mechanical 193 inclination to an expression of what shall I say liberality. No, that will never do for a bookseller graciousness that's a better phrase for the purpose. More characteristic of his manner, and more congenial to my own feelings. Well, to be plain then, whenever a young author can pass through an interview with the head man of the firm without hearing anything in the shape of melancholy musings, serious disappointments, large numbers on hand, doubtful speculation, and such like pleasant innuendos, he may rest satisfied that his book is selling well, and his publisher realizing a fair proportion of profit for his adventurous spirit. I am just now enjoying that pleasant gratification, the reflection of having added to my own comforts without having detracted from the happiness of others. In short, my scheme improves with every fresh essay, and my friend Bob Transit, who has just joined me in a bottle of iced claret at Long's, has been for some minutes busily engaged in booking mine host and his exhibits, while I, under pretense of writing a letter, have been penning this introduction to a chapter on fashion and its follies, annexing thereunto a few notes of characters that may serve to illustrate that resort of all that is exquisite and superlative in the annals of high ton. Evening and in high spirits, a scene worthy of the acknowledged talent of the artist, and full of fearful and instructive narrative for the pen of the English spy. Seated snugly in one corner of Long's new and splendid coffee-room, we had resolved on our entering to depart early. But the society we had the good fortune to be afterwards associated with might have tempted stronger heads than those of either Bob Transit the artist or Bernard Blackmantle the moralist. Waiter, bring another bottle of iced claret and tell Long to book it to the King's lieutenant. By the honor of my ancestry, said the Honorable Lilliman Lionize, but I am devilishly cut already. 194 . You do well, mighty well, sir, to swear by the honor of your ancestors. For very few of your modern stars have a ray of that same meteoric light to illumine their own Milky Way. That flash of your wit, Lieutenant, comes upon one like the electric shock of an intended insult, and I must expect you will apologize. Then I fear, young valiant, you will die of the disease that has killed more brave men than the last 20 years' war. And what is that, sir, may I ask? Expectation, my jewel. I've breakfasted, dined, supped, and slept upon it for the last half-century, and am not one step higher in the army list yet. But, Lieutenant, let me observe that we are both pretty nigh bosky, and should not therefore be too fastidious in our jokes over the bottle. Enter waiter. The claret, gentleman. Mr. Long's compliments, and he requests permission to assure you that it is some of the late Duke of Queensberry's choice stock, marked a 1. Which signifies, according to Long's edition of Cocker, that we must pay double for the liqueur. Come, Lionize, fill a bumper, and let us tales of the lion toast our caput, the sovereign, the first Corinthian of his day, and the most polished prince in the world. Tiger, one, ejaculated a soft voice in the adjoining box. Ask Tom who the trumps are in the next stall, and if they are known here tell them, the Honorable Thomas Optimus fills a bumper to their last toast. One since the death of the Earl of Barrymore, Tom has succeeded to the vacant chair at Long's. Nor is the Tiger Mercury the only point in which he closely resembles his great prototype. 196 a smart, clever-looking boy of about 15 years of age darted forward to execute the Honorable's commands. When having received the requisite information from the waiter, he approached the lieutenant and his friend, and with great politeness, but no lack of confidence, made the wishes of his master known to the bon vivants. The consequence was an immediate interchange of civilities, which brought the Honorable into close contact with his merry neighbors. And the result, a unanimous resolution to make a night of it. At this moment our tete-a-tete was interrupted by the appearance of old Crony, who, staunch as a well-trained pointer to the scent of game, had tracked me hither from my lodgings. From him I learned the lieutenant was a fellow of infinite jest and sterling worth, a descendant of the O'Fairlands of Tipperary, whose ancestry claimed precedence of King Brian Barrock, a specimen of the antique in his composition, robust, gigantic, and courageous. Time and intestine troubles had impaired the fortunes of his house, but the family character remained untainted amid the conflicting revolutions that had convulsed the Emerald Isle. Enough, however, was left to render the lieutenant independent of his military expectations. He had joined the army when young, seen service and the world in many climates, but the natural uncompromising spirit which distinguished him, partaking perhaps something too much of the pride of ancestry, had hitherto prevented his soliciting the promotion he was fairly entitled to. Like a majority of his countrymen, he was cold and sententious as a Laplander when sober, and warm and volatile as a Frenchman when in his cups. Half a dozen duels had been the natural consequence of an equal number of intrigues, but although the scars of honor had seared his manly countenance, his heart and person were yet devoted to the service of the ladies. Fame had trumpeted forth his prowess in the wars of 196 Venus, until notoriety had marked him out an object of general remark, and the king's lieutenant was as proud of the myrtle wreath as the hero of Waterloo might be of the laurel crown. But see, the door opens, how perfumed, what style! Long bows to the earth. What an exquisite smile! Such a coffee-house visitor banishes pain, while Optimus rising, cries welcome Joe Hayne. May you never want cash, boy here, waiter a glass. Lieutenant, you'll join us in toasting a lass. I'll give you an actress Maria the fair. I'll drink her, but Tom, you have ruined me there. By my hopes, I am blown, cut, floored, and rejected at the critical moment, sirs, when I expected to revel in bliss. But here's white-headed Bob, my prime minister, he shall unravel the job. And if Jackson determines you've not acted well, I'll mill you, Tom Optimus, though you're a swell. Sit down, Joe, be jolly 'twas Carter alone that has every obstacle in your way thrown. Nay, never despair, man you'll yet be her liege, but rally again, boy, you'll carry the siege. Thus quieted, Joe sat him down to get mellow, for Joe at the bottom's a hearty good fellow. Have you heard the report, said Optimus, that Harborough is actually about to follow your example and marry an actress? I and his old flame, Mrs. Stonyhewer, is ready to die of love and a broken heart in consequence. Just as true, my jewel, as that I shall be gazetted field marshal, or that you, Mr. Optimus, will be accused of faithfulness to Lady Emily. Our young friend here, the rich commoner, has given currency to such a variety of common reports, that the false jade grows bold enough to beard us in our very teeth. Why zounds! Lieutenant, said Lion-Eyes, how very sentimental you are becoming. It's a way of mine, Jewel, to appear singular in some sort of society. 197 and satirical in all, I'll vouch for you, Lieutenant, said Optimus. By Jassus, you've hit it. If truth be satire, it's a language I love, although it's not very savory to some palates. Will the Duke marry the banker's widow? Joel, that's the grand question at Tattersall's. Now your match with Maria's off, and Earl Rivers's greyhounds are disposed of. Only give me the office, boy, in that particular, and I'll give you a company tomorrow, if money will purchase one, and realize a handsome fortune by betting on the event. Then I'll bet Cox and Greenwood's cash account against the commander-in-chief's, that the widow marries a Beauclerk, becomes in due time Duchess of St. albans and dies without issue, leaving her immense property as a charitable bequest to enrich a poor dukedom. And thus, having in earlier life degraded one part of the peerage, make amends to the Butes, the Guildfords, and the Burdetts, by a last redeeming act to another branch of the aristocracy. At it again, Lieutenant, firing ricochet shot and knocking down Duck and Drake at the same time. Sure, that has been the great amusement of my life. In battle and abroad I have contrived to knock down my share of the male enemies of my country. In peace, and at home I've a mighty pleasant knack of winging a few female bushfighters. But the widow, my dear fellow, is now a woman of high, too, character. Has not the moral Marquis of Hertford undertaken to remove all indisabilities? And did he not introduce the lady to the fashionable world at his own hotel, the Piccadilly, Peccadillo, Guildhall? Was not the ferret at Holly Grove, attended by H.R.H., the Duke of York and Mrs. C.Y., and all the virtuous portion of our nobility? And has she not since been admitted to the parties at the Duke of Query did Mr. Optimus mean high as game is high? Tilda 198 tilde Devonshires, and what is still more wonderful, been permitted to appear at court, and since, in the royal presence, piously introduced to the whole bench of bishops. By Jassus, that's true, and I beg Belle Harriet's pardon. But I well remember, I commanded the city guard in the old Corn Market, Dublin, on the very night her reputed father, Jolly Jack Kinnear, as the rebels called him, contrived to wish us good morning very suddenly, and took himself off to the seat of government. I shall be obliged to entertain the world with a few of her eccentricities some day or other. The ghost of poor Ralph Wewitzer cries loudly for revenge. The sapient police knight, when he secured the box of letters for his patroness, little suspected that they had all been previously copied by Lieutenant Terence O'Fairlin of the King's Own. A mighty inquisitive sort of a personage, who will try his art to do her justice, spite of leather or prunella. The party was at this moment increased by the arrival of Lord William, on whose friendly arm reposed the Berkeley Adonis par noble fratrum. "Give me leave, Lieutenant," said his lordship, "to introduce my friend the Colonel." "And give me leave," whispered Optimus, "to withdraw my friend Hayne, for two suns shine not in the same hemisphere." "The man that makes a move in the direction of the door makes me his enemy," said the lieutenant loudly. And the whole party were immediately seated. Hitherto, my friend Crony and myself had been too pleasantly occupied with the whim, wit, and anecdote of the lieutenant, to pay much attention to the individuality of character that surrounded the festive board. But having now entered upon our second bottle, the humorist commenced his satirical sketches, holding forth to the gaze of this fortunate time the extremes of the beautiful and the sublime. Tilda 199 tilde suppose I commence with the pea-green count, said Crony. I know the boy's ambition is notoriety, and an artist who means to rise in his profession should always aim at painting first-rate portraits, well-known characters, because they are sure to excite public inquiry, thus extending the artist's fame and securing the good opinion of his patrons by the gratification of their unlimited vanity. The sketch, too, may be otherwise serviceable to the rising generation, the Mr. Greens and Newcomes of the world of fashion, if they would avoid the sharks who infest the waters of pleasure, and are always on the anxious lookup for a nibble at a new come-out. The young exquisite's connection with the fancy, or rather with the lowest branch of that illustrious body, the bruising fraternity and their boon companions, had been, though not an avowed, a real source of jealousy to many of his dear bosom friends at Long's Hotel, from the moment of the Count's making his debut. Imberbis juvenes, tandem custod remote, into the fashionable world. That he would be ultimately floored by his milling proteges, it did not require the sagacity of a conjurer to foresee. Nor was it likely that the term of such a catastrophe would be so tediously delayed, as to subject anyone who might be eager to witness its arrival to that sickness of the heart which arises from hope deferred. But this process for scooping out the silver, or foot, ball, as he has since been designated, by no means suited the ideas of the worthies before alluded to. The learned Scriblerus makes mention of certain doctors, 3, frequently seen at White's in his day, of a modest and upright appearance, with no air of overbearing, and habited like true masters of arts in black and white only. They were justly styled, says the above high authority. 3. A cant phrase for dice. 200 subtiles and graves, but not always irrefragabiles, being sometimes examined, and, by a nice distinction, divided and laid open. The descendants of these doctors still exist, and have not degenerated, either in their numbers or their merits, from their predecessors. They take up their principal residence in some well-known mansions about the neighborhood of the court, and many of the gentlemen who honored the Count with their especial notice on his entree into public life are understood to be familiarly acquainted with them. Now could they have only instilled into the young gentleman a wish to be introduced to these doctors, or once prevailed upon him to take them in hand for the purpose of deciding what might be depending upon the result of the investigation. Nay, could they even have spurred him on to an exhibition of his tactics, in maneuvering those party-colored troops, a shining train, drawn forth to combat on the velvet plain? They could have so delightfully abridged the task, which to their impatient eyes appeared to be much too slow in executing, could have spared their dear friend so much unnecessary time and labor in disencumbering himself of the superfluity of worldly dross which had fallen to his share. A little cogging, sleeving, and palming, nay, a mere spindle judiciously planted, or a few long ones introduced on the weaving system, could have effected in one evening what 50 milling matches, considering the glorious uncertainty attaching to pugilistic as well as legal contests, might fail to accomplish. By this method, too, the person in whom they kindly took so strong an interest would, even when he had lost everything, have escaped the imputation of having dissipated his property. It would have been comfortably distributed, in respectable dividends, among a few gentlemen of acknowledged talent, instead of floating in air like the leaves of the 201 Sibyl, and alighting in various parts of the inner and outer ring, now depositing a few cool hundreds in the pockets of a sporting priestly bookseller, or the brother of a Westminster abbot, now contributing a small modicum to bright the humbler speculations of the Dean Street caseman or the Battersea gardener. But to this conclusion Horatio would not come. He was good for backing and betting on pugilists, but on the turf he would do little, and at the tables nothing. His zealous friends had therefore no chance in the way they would have liked best, but being men of the world and knowing, like gaze bear, that there might be picking even in the carving of a chicken, they did not disdain to make the most in their power by watching the motions of his hobby, and if this was not a sufficient prize to furnish much cause for exultation, it was at least one that it would have been unwise to reject. A contemporary writer has exerted to the utmost the very little talent he possesses to represent the Peregrine's uniform resistance to all the temptations of cards and dice, as a proof of his possessing a strength of mind and decision of character, rarely found in young men of his fortune and time of life. In the elegant language of this apologist, the Count, by this prudent abstinence, has shown himself not half so green as some supposed, and the sharps, and those who have tried on the grand mace with him, have discovered that he was no flat. How far this negative eulogium may be gratifying to the feelings of the individual on whom it is bestowed, I will not say. In my character of English spy, I have been under the necessity of carefully observing this fortunate youth, depuis quella rose venait de clore, in other words, from the time that he became, or rather might 202 have become, his own master, and I should certainly not attribute his refraining from the tables to any superior strength of mind. Indeed, it would be singular if such a characteristic belonged to a man whose own hired advocate could only vindicate his client's heart at the expense of his head. Pope tells us that to form a just estimate of anyone's character, we must study his ruling passion, and by adopting this rule, we shall soon obtain a satisfactory clue both to the exquisite Count's penchant for the prize ring and his aversion to the hells. Some persons exhibit an inexplicable union of avarice and extravagance, of parsimony and prodigality. Something of this kind is observable in the gentleman in question. But self predominates with him in all, and being joined to rather a low species of vanity, and a strong inclination to be what is vulgarly called cock of the walk, it has uniformly displayed itself in an insatiate thirst for notoriety. Now pugilists, from the very nature of their profession, must be public characters, while the gamester, to the utmost of his power, does what he does by stealth and blushes to find it fame. To be the patron of some noted bruiser, to bear him to the field of action in your traveling barouche, accompanied by Tom Cribb the XX champion, Tom Spring the ex-champion, Jack Langan and Tom Cannon the would-be champions, and Lily White Richmond, is sure to make your name as notorious, though perhaps not much more reputable than those of your associates. But the man who, like the youth that fired the Ephesian dome, aims at celebrity alone, in frequenting the purlieus of the gaming house only, wastes his sweetness on the desert air. Moreover, the members of the ebony clubs being compelled to assume the appearance and adopt the manners, insensibly imbibe too much of the feelings of gentlemen, to be likely to pay, to the most passive pigeon that ever submitted to rooking, the cap-in-hand homage rendered by a 203 practitioner within the pins and binders of the prize ring to the swell who takes £5 worth of benefit tickets, or stands a 50 in the stakes for a milling match. These motives seem to me sufficient to have prompted the Count's predominating attachment to the prize ring and its heroes, which, however, having, as I have before remarked, been viewed with no favorable eye by some of his comrades, his recent ill luck at Warwick could hardly be expected to escape the jests and sarcasms of his bottle companions. "'Fore God," said Optimus, "this backing of your man against the Black Diamond has been but a bad speck. Out heavyish, I suppose, Joe." "Count, why, a stiffish bout, I must confess, and what's more, I'm not by any means without my suspicions about the correctness of the thing." "Optimus, what cross and jostle work again?" "A second edition of Virginia Water. But I thought you felt assured that Cannon would not do wrong for the wealth of Windsor Castle." "Count, true, I did feel so, and others confirmed me in my assurance, but I believe I was woefully mistaken, and curse me if I don't think they were all in the concern of doing me." "Optimus, was not there a floating report about the bargeman receiving 1,000 to throw it over?" "Count, something of the sort, but one don't believe it. 2 bills for 500, but so drawn that they could not be negotiated." "I shall certainly," said the Count, "give notice to the stakeholders not to give up the battle money for the present." "Optimus, pshaw, that will never do. A thing of that nature must be done at the time. Besides, Cannon stood 200 in his own money, and says he will freely pay his losses." "Count, a pretty do that, when he had a check 204 of mine for the sum he put down. But I've stopped payment of that at my banker's." "Optimus, and will as surely be obliged to revoke that order, as well as to give up disputing the stakes." "No, no, Joe, get out of the business now as you can and cut it. I always thought and told you that I thought your man had no chance. But his going to fight so out of condition, in a contest where all his physical powers were necessary, does look as if you had been put in for a piece of ready-made luck. But what could you expect? Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? That a gentleman can patronize such fellows? Count, I am still of opinion that the spirit of national courage is much promoted." "Optimus, spirit of a fiddlestick. Nonsense, man, that card will win no trick now. You, like others, might have thought so once, but you have seen enough by this time to know that the system is on altogether a different tack, that its stanchest upholders and admirers are bullies, sharpers, pickpockets, pothouse keepers, coachmen, fraudulent bankrupts, the John B's and Big B's, and all the lowest B's of society in station and character, whose only merit, if such it can be called, is the open disclaiming of anything like honor or principle. And after having been a patron of such a set of wretches, you will end by becoming, according to circumstances, the object of their vulgar abuse or the butt of their coarse ridicule." "The latter, I understand," said Lord William, "is pretty much the case already. A friend of mine was telling me that one of the precious brotherhood, on hearing that Joe meant to dispute his bets, asked what better could be expected from a footman out of place." "No more of that, Hal, if thou lovest him," exclaimed Optimus, who immediately perceived, by his 205 countenance, that the last hit had been too hard. "Much more has been said upon this affair than it is worth. let us change the subject." "By my conscience," exclaimed the lieutenant, "and here's an excellent episode to wind up the drama with, headed, 'The Football's Farewell to the Ring.' I'll read it you, with permission, and afterwards, Colonel, you shall have a copy of it for next Sunday's Age. It will save the magnanimous little bee, your accommodating editor, or his locum tenens, the fat gent, the trouble of straining their own weak noddles to produce any more soft attempts at the scandalous and the sarcastic." "By the honor of my ancestry," rejoined the Gloucestershire colonel, "do you take me for a reporter to the paper in question?" "Why not?" said the lieutenant coolly. "If you are not a reporter and a supporter too, my gallant friend, by the powers of Pole Kelly, but you are the most ill-used man in His Majesty's dominions." "Sir, I stand upon my honor," said the colonel petulantly. "By the powers, you may, and very easily too," whispered O'Fairlin, in a side speech to his left-hand companion, "for it has been trodden under foot by others these many months. To be plain with you, Colonel, there are certain big whispers abroad that you and your noble associate, the amiable yonder, with that beautiful obliquity of vision, which is said to have pierced the heart of a northern siren, are the joint telegraphs of the age. Sure, no man in his senses can suspect messieurs the conducteurs of knowing anything of what passes in polished life, or think." "Ah, my dear Wewitzer," said Belle Harriet, now Mrs. Gouts, speaking to the late comedian of some female friend, "she has an eye." "An eye that would pierce through a deal board." "By heavens," said Wewitzer, "that must be then a gimlet eye. Tilde 206 tilde of charging them with any personal knowledge of the amusing incidents they pretend to relate, beyond a certain little wanton's green room on dits, or the chaste conversations of the blushless naiads who sport and frolic in the Cytherean mysteries which are nightly performed in the dark groves of Vauxhall. Take a word of advice from an old soldier, Colonel. It is worse than leading a forlorn hope to attempt to storm a garrison single-handed. Club secrets must be protected by club laws, for 'tis an old Eton maxim that tales told out of school generally bring the relater to the block. But my friend Stanhope will no doubt explain this matter with a much better grace when he comes in contact with the tale-bearer." "Hem," instinctively ejaculated Horace Seaty, the once elegant Apollo of Hyde Park, "thereby hangs a tale. 'Tis a vile age, and the sooner we forget it, the better I am for love and peace." "I.e." "A peace," responded the lieutenant. Horace smiled and continued, "Come, Tom Duncombe, I'll give our mutual favorite, the female Giovanni. Lads, fill your glasses. We toast a deity, and one, too, who has equal claims upon most of us for the everlasting favors she has conferred." "'Fore gad, Lieutenant," simpered out Lord William, squaring himself round to resume the conversation with the veteran, "if you do not mind your hits, we must positively cut. My friend, the colonel, will certainly set his Black's 5 upon you, and I shall be obliged to speak to little Magnanimous, the ex-Brummagem director, to strike off a counterfeit impression of you in his scandalous Sunday Chronicle. 'Pon honor, I must. 5. A very curious tradition is connected with a certain castle near Gloucester, which foretells that the family name shall be extinct when the race of the Blacks cease to be peculiar to the family. A prophecy that I think not very likely to be fulfilled, judging by the conduct of the present race of representatives. A species of Danish bloodhound, whose portraits and names are carved in the oaken cornice of one of the castle chambers. Tilde 207 tilde the divil a care," said the lieutenant laughingly. "To arms with you, my Lord William. My fire engine will soon damp the ardor of little Magnanimous, and an extra dose of Tom Bish's compounds put his friend, the fat gent, where his readers have long been, in sweet somniferous repose. But zounds, gentlemen, I am forgetting the Count, whose pardon I crave, for bestowing my attention on minor constellations while indulged with the overpowering brilliancy of his meteoric presence." "The farewell to the ring," vociferated the Count. "Come, Lieutenant, give us the episode. I long to hear all my misfortunes strung together in rhyme." "By the powers, you shall have it then. And a true history it is, as ever was said or sung in church, chapel, or conventicle, with only one little exception by the free use of poetic license. The satirist has fixed his hero in a very embarrassing situation, just locked him up at Radford Steel Hotel in Carey Street, Chancery Lane, coning over a long bill of John Long's. and a still longer one of the lawyers, with a sort of codicil, by way of refresher, of the house charges, and a smoking detainer tacked onto its tail, by Hooker Hudson. Long enough to put any gentleman's pipe out. There's the argument, program, or fable. Now for the characters. They are all drawn from the life by the English spy, C. Plate, under the amusing title of Mourning, and in low spirits, a scene in a lock-up house. A very appropriate spot for a lament to the past, and "'Tis past, and the sun of my glory is set. How changed in my case is the fortune of war. With no money to back, and no credit to bet, no more in the fancy I shine forth a star. Tilde 208 tilde tilde. Accursed be the day when my bargeman I brought to fight with Joss. Hudson, the thought is a sting. I sighing exclaim, by experience taught, farewell to Tom Cannon, farewell to the ring. By the Blackwater victory made drunk with success, endless visions of milling enchanted my knob I thought my luck in, so I could do no less than match, gainst the Streatham my white-headed bob. I've some reason to think that there, too, I was done, for it oft has been hinted that battle was crossed. But I well know that all which at Yateley I won, with 1,000 outry at Bagshot I lost. At Warwick a turn in my favour again appeared, and my crest I anew reared with pride. Hudson's efforts to conquer my bargeman were vain, I took the long odds, and I floored the flash side. But with training and treating and sparring, and paying for all through the nose, as most do in beginning their fancy career, I am borne out in saying, I was quite out of pocket in spite of my winning. So when Bob fought old George, being shortish of money, and bearing in memory the Bagshot affair, in my former pal's stakes I stood only a pony, which was never returned, so I'm done again there. To be perfectly safe, on the old one I betted, for the knowing ones told me the thing was made right if it had been, a good bit of blunt I'd have netted, but a double X spoilt it, and Bob won the fight. Tilde 209 tilde tilde. But the famed stage of Warwick and Ward were before me. I looked at Tom Cannon and thought of the past. I was sure he must win, and that wealth would shower o'er me. So, like Richard, I set all my hopes on a cast. And the die was soon thrown, and my luck did not alter. I was floored at all points, and my hopes were a hum. I'm at Tattersall's all but believed a defaulter. And here, in a sponging house, shut by a bum. Mid the lads of the fancy I needs must aspire to be quite au fait. And I have scarcely seen of mills half a score, ere I'm forward to retire. O thou greenest among all the green ones, P. Green. And what have I gained, but the queer reputation of a whimsical dandy, half foolish, half flash? To bruisers and sharpers, in high and low station a poor easy dupe, till deprived of my cash. All you who would enter the circle I've quitted, reflect on my fate, and think what you're about. By bribery betrayed, or by cunning outwitted, in the fancy each novice is quickly cleaned out. For me it has lost its attractions and luster, the thing's done with me, and I've done with the thing, the blunt for my bets I must manage to muster. Then farewell to Tom Cannon, farewell to the ring. The reading of this more so produced, as might have been expected, considerable merriment on the one hand, and some little discussion upon the other. The angry feelings of the commander-in-chief and his pals overbalancing the mirthful by their solemnly protesting against the exposure of the secrets of the prison house, which, in this instance, they contended, were violently distorted by some enemy to the modern accomplishment of pugilism. In a few moments all was chaos, and the stormy confusion of tongues, prophetic, of the affair ending in a grand display and milling catastrophe, the apprehensions of which induced John Long and John Long's man to be on the alert in removing the service, and suite of superb cut glass, which had given an additional luster to the splendor of the dessert. The arrival of other characters, and the good humor of the Count, joined to a plentiful supply of soda water and iced punch, had, however, the effect of cooling the malcontents, who had no sooner recovered their wonted hilarity than old Crony proceeded to particularize, by a comparison of the past with the present, interspersing his remarks with anecdotes of the surrounding group. "These are your modern men of fashion," said Crony, "and the specimen you have this day had of their conduct, and pursuits and authority you may safely quote as one generally characteristic. To support this new fashion, in circles of ton, new habits, new thoughts must of course be put on, taste, feeling, and friendship laid by on the shelf, and nothing or worshipped or thought of but self. It was not thus in the days of our ancestors. The farther we look back, the purer honor was. In the days of chivalry, a love promise was a law, the braver the knight, the truer in love. Then, too, religion, delicacy. Sentiment, romantic passion, disinterested friendship, loyalty to king, love of country, a thirst for fame, bravery, nay, heroism, characterized 211 the age, the nation, the noble, the knight, and esquire. Mercy! What squires we have nowadays! At a more recent date, all was courtliness, feeling, high sentiment, proud and lofty bearing, principle, the word inviolable, politeness at its highest pitch of refinement. Lovers perished to defend their lady's honor. Now they live to sully it. The nobility and the people were distinct in dress and address, but above all, amenity and good breeding marked the distinction, and the line was unbroken. Now dress is all confusion, address far below par, amenity is a dead letter, and as to breeding, it is confined to the breeding of horses and dogs, except when law steps in to encourage the breeding of disputes. Not to mention the evils arising from crossing the old breed. Nor can we much wonder at it, when we reflect on the altered way of life, the change of habits, and the declension of virtue, arising from these very causes. Each hopeful hero now essays to start to spoil the intellect, destroy the heart, to render useless all kind nature gave, and live the dupe of every well-dressed knave, to herd with gamblers, be a blackleg king, and shine the monarch of the betting ring. Men of family and fashion, in those golden days, passed their time in courts, in dancing rooms, and at clubs composed of the very cream of birth and elegance. You heard occasionally of Lord Such-a-one being killed in a duel, or of the baronet or esquire dying from cold caught at a splendid fête, or by going lightly clad to his magnificent vis-a-vis after a select masquerade. But you never read his death in a newspaper from a catarrh caught in the watch-house, from an fistic fight, or in a row at a hell-things now not astonishing, since even men with a title and a name of rank pass their time in the stable, at common hells, at the Fives Court the hall of infamy. In the watch-house, the justice-room, and make the finish in 212 the Fleet, King's Bench, or die in misery and debt abroad. In the olden times, a star of fashion was quoted for dancing at court, for the splendor of his equipages, his running footmen and black servants, his expensive dress, his accomplishments, his celebrity at foreign courts, his fine form, delicate hand, jewels, library, and see. Now fame, for notoriety is so called, may be obtained by being a Greek or pigeon, by being mistaken for John the coachman, when on the box behind 4 tits, by being a good gentleman miller, by feeding the fancy, standing in print for crim. Con, breaking a promise of marriage once or twice, and breaking as many tradesmen as possible afterwards, breaking the watchman's head on the top of the morn, and lastly, breaking away in the skirmish through life for Calais or the Low Countries. There is as much difference between the old English gentleman and him who ought to be the modern representative of that name, as there is between a racer and a hack, a fine spaniel, and a cross of the terrier and bulldog. In our days of polish and refinement, we had a Lord Stair, a Sedley, a Sir John Stepney, a Sir William Hamilton, and many others, as our ambassadors, representing our nation as the best bred in the world, and by their grace and amiability, gaining the admiration of the whole continent. We had in remoter times our Lords Bolingbroke, Chesterfield, and Littleton, our Steele, and C, the celebrated poets, authors, and patterns of fashion and elegance of the age. We had our Argyll. The state's whole thunder formed to wield, and shake at once the Senate and the field. We had our virtuosi of the highest rank, our rich and noble authors in abundance. The departed Byron stood alone to fill their place. The classics were cultivated, not by the learned profession only, but by the votaries of fashion. Now our Greek scholars are of 213 another cast. 6. In earlier days, the chivalrous foe met his opponent in open combat and broke a lance for the amusement of the spectators, while he revenged his injuries in public. Now the practice of dueling 7 has become almost a profession, and the privacy with which it is of necessity conducted renders it always subject to suspicion, see plate. Independent of which, the source of quarrel is too often beneath the dignity of gentlemen, and the wanton sacrifice of life, rather an act of bravado than of true courage. 7. 6. Adape nunc danum insidiae, et ab uno de se omnes. The Greek population of the fashionable world comprises a very large portion of society, including among its members names and persons of illustrious and noble title, whose whole life and pleasure in life appears to rest upon the hazard of a die. The modern Greek, though he cannot boast much resemblance to Achilles, Ajax, Patroclus, or Nestor, is, nevertheless, a close imitator of the equally renowned chief of Ithaca. To describe his person, habits, pursuits, and manners would be to sketch the portrait of one or more finished roués, who are to be found in most genteel societies. The mysteries of his art are manifold, and principally consist in the following rules and regulations, put forth by an old member of the corps, whose conscience returned to torture him when his reign of earthly vice was near its close. Elements of Greeking. 1. A Greek should be like a mole, visible only at night. 2. He should be a niggard of his speech, and a profligate with his liquor, giving freely, but taking cautiously. 3. He must always deprecate play in public, and pretend an entire ignorance of his game. 4. He must be subtle as the fox, and wary as the well-trained hawk, never showing chase too soon, or losing his pigeon by an over-eager desire to pluck him. 5. He must be content to lose a little at first, that he may thereby make a final hit decisive. 6. He must practice like a conjurer in private, that his slippery tricks in public may escape observation. Palming the digits requires no ordinary degree of agility. 7. He must secure a confederate who, having been pigeoned, has since been enlightened and will consent to decoy others to the net. 8. He should have once held the rank of captain, as an introduction to good society, and a privilege to bully anyone who may question his conduct. 9. He must always put on the show of generosity with those he has plucked, that is, while their bill, bond, post obit, or other legal security is worth having. 214 . 10. He should be a prince of good fellows at his own table, have the choicest wines for particular companies, and when a grand hit cannot be made, refuse to permit play in his own house. Or, on a decisive occasion, let his decoy or partner pluck the pigeon, while he appears to lose to some confederate a much larger sum. 11. He must not be afraid to fight a duel, mill and rumbustical green one, or bully a brother sharper who attempts to poach upon his preserves. 12. He must concert certain signals with confederates for working the broads, i.e., cards such as fingers at whist, toe to toe for an ace, or the left hand to the eye for a king, and so on, until he can make the fate of a rubber certain. On this point, he must be well instructed in the arts of marked cards, briefs, broads, corner bends, middle ditto, curves, or Kingston bridge, and other arch tricks of slipping, palming, forcing, or even substituting, whatever card may be necessary to win the game. Such are a few of the elements of modern Greeking, contained in the 12 golden rules recorded above, early attention to which may save the inexperienced from ruin. 7 elements of dueling. The British Code of Duel, a little work professing to give the necessary instructions for man-killing according to honor, lays down the following rules as indispensable for the practice of principles and seconds in the pleasant and humane amusement of shooting at each other. 1. To choose out a snug sequestered spot, where the ground is level, and no natural, terrestrial, or celestial line presenting itself to assist either party in his views of sending his opponent into eternity. 2. To examine the pistols, see that they are alike in quality and length, and load in presence of each other. 3. To measure the distance, 10 paces of not less than 30 inches being the minimum, the parties to step to it, not from it. 4. To fire by signal and at random, it being considered unfair to take aim at the man whose life you go out to take. 5. Not to deliver the pistols cocked, lest they should go off unexpectedly, and after one fire, the second should use his endeavors to produce a reconciliation. 6. If your opponent fire in the air, it is very unusual, and must be a case of extreme anguish when you are obliged to insist upon another shot at him. 7. 3 fires must be the ultimatum in any case. Any more reduces duel to a conflict for blood, says the code writer. If the parties can afford it, there should be 2 surgeons in attendance, but if economical, 1 mutual friend will suffice. The person receiving the first fire, in case of wound, taking the first dressing. 8. It being always understood that wife, children, parents, and relations are no impediment with men of very different relative stations in society to their meeting on equal terms. The consistency, morality, justice, and humanity of this code I leave to the gratifying reflection of those who have most honorably killed their man. 215. For, as dueling now is completely a science, and sets the Old Bailey itself at defiance, now Hibernians are met with in every street, 'tis as needful to know how to shoot as to eat. The following singular challenge is contained in a letter from Sir William Herbert, of St. Julian's in Monmouthshire, father-in-law to the famous Lord Herbert, of Cherbury, to a gentleman of the name of Morgan. The original is in the British Museum. Sir, peruse this letter, in God's name. Be not disquieted. I reverence your hoary hair. Although in your son I find too much folly and lewdness, yet in you I expect gravity and wisdom. It hath pleased your son, late at Bristol, to deliver a challenge to a man of mine, on the behalf of a gentleman, as he said, as good as myself. Who he was he named not, neither do I know. But if he be as good as myself, it must either be for virtue, for birth, for ability, or for calling and dignity. For virtue I think he meant not, for it is a thing which exceeds his judgment. If for birth, he must be the heir male of an earl, the heir in blood of 10 earls, for in testimony thereof I bear their several coats. Besides, he must be of the blood royal, for by my grandmother Devereux I am lineally and legitimately descended out of the body of Edward IV. If for ability he must have £1,000 a year in possession, £1,000 more in expectation, and must have some thousands in substance besides. If for calling and dignity, he must be knight or lord of several seigneuries in several kingdoms, a lieutenant of his county, and a councillor of a province. Now to lay all circumstances aside, be it known to your son or to any man else, that if there be anyone who beareth the name of gentleman, and whose words are of reputation in his county, that doth say or dare say that I have done unjustly, spoken an untruth, stained my credit and reputation in this matter, or in any matter else wherein your son is exasperated, I say he lieth in his throat, and my sword shall maintain my word upon him in any place or province wheresoever he dare. And where I stand not sworn to observe the peace. But if they be such as are within my governance, and over whom I have authority, I will for their reformation chastise them with justice, and for their malaport misdemeanor bind them to their good behavior. Of this sort I account your son and his like, against whom I will shortly issue my warrant, if this my warning doth not reform them. And so I thought fit to advertise you hereof, and leave you to God. I am N.C. W.M. H.U.R.B.R.T. 216 . The art of fencing formerly distinguished the gentleman, who then wore a sword as a part of his dress. He is now contented with a regular stand-up fight, and exhibits a fist like a knuckle-bone of mutton hard, coarse, and of certain magnitude. The bludgeon hammer-headed whip, or a vulgar twig, succeeds the clouded and amber-headed cane, and instead of the snuff-box being rare and an article of parade, to exhibit a beauty's miniature bestowed in love, or that of a crowned head, given for military or diplomatic services, all ranks take snuff out of cheap and vulgar boxes, mostly of inferior French manufacture, with not unfrequently indecent representations on them. Or you have wooden concerns with stage coaches, fighting cocks, a pugilistic combat, or an ill-drawn neck and neck race upon them. The frill of the nobleman and gentleman's linen once bore jewels of high price, or a conceit, like a noted beauty's eye, set in brilliance less sparkling than what formed the center. Now a fox, a stag, or a dog worthily occupies the place of that enchanting resemblance. In equitation, we had Sir Sidney Meadows, a pattern and a prototype for gentlemen horsemen. The Melton hunt now is more in vogue, and the sons of our nobility ride like their own grooms and post by Zai, and dress like them too. Autrefois, a man of fashion might be perceived ere he was seen, from a reunion 217 of rich and costly perfumes. Now snuff and tobacco, the quid, the pinch, and the cigar announce his good taste. The cambric pocket handkerchief was the only one known in the olden times. The belcher, what a name! Supplies its place, together with the bird's eye or the colors of some black or white boxer. An accomplished man was the delight of all companies in former times. An out and outer, one up to everything, down as a nail or the knocker of Newgate, a trump or a Trojan, now carry the mode of praise. One that can patter flash, floor a Charlie, mill a coal heaver, come coachy in prime style, up to every rig and row in town, and down to every move upon the board from a nibble at the club to a dead hit at a hell. Can swear, smoke, take snuff, lush, play at all games, and throw over both sexes in different ways. He is the finished man. The attributes of a modern fine gentleman are to have his address at his club and his residence anywhere, to lounge, laugh, lisp, and loll away the time from 4 to 8, when having dressed, eat his olives, he goes to Almack's if he can, or struts into Fopp's Alley at the Opera in boots, in defiance of decency or the remonstrance of the doorkeepers. Talks loud to be noticed. And having handed some woman of fashion to her carriage, gets in after her without invitation, and, as a matter of course, behaves rudely in return. Makes a last call at the club in his way home to learn the issue of the debate, and try his luck at French hazard or fleecing a novice. See plate. If his fortune should be 1,000 per annum, his income may be extended to 5, by virtue of credit and credulity. If he comes out very early in life, say 18, he will scarcely expect to be visible at 24. But if he does not appear until he is 21 and then lives all his days, he may die fairly of old age, infirmity, and insolvency at 26. His topographical knowledge of town is bounded by the fashionable 218 directory, which limits his recognition, on the north, by Oxford Street, on the east, by Bond Street, on the south, by Pall Mall, and on the west, by Park Lane. Ask him where is Russell Square, and he stares at you for a rustic inquire what authors he reads, and he answers Weatherby and Rhodes. Ask what are their works, and he laughs outright at your ignorance of the racing calendar, annals of sporting, Boxiana, and turf remembrancer. Question his knowledge of science. It consists in starch à la brumelate, of mathematics in working problems on the cards, of algebra in calculating the long odds or squaring the chances of the dice. He tells you his favorite book is his betting account, that John Bull is the only newspaper worth reading, and that you must never expect to be admitted into good society if the cut of your coat does not bear outward proofs of its being fabricated either in St. James's Street or Bond Street, that the great requisites are confidence, indifference, and nonchalance. As for instance, George Wombwell being thrown out of his Tilbury on Highgate Hill, when driving Captain Burdett, and both being dreadfully bruised, George is picked. 8. When Brummel fell into disgrace, he devised the starched neckcloth, with the design of putting the prince's neck out of fashion, and of bringing his Royal Highness's muslin, his bow and wadding, into contempt. When he first appeared in the stiffened cravat, tradition says that the sensation incensed. James's Street was prodigious. Dandies were struck dumb with envy, and washerwomen miscarried. No one could conceive how the effect was produced. Tin card, 1,000 contrivances were attempted, and innumerable men cut their throats in vain experiments. The secret, in fact, puzzled and baffled everyone, and poor Dandy Ld died raving mad of it. His mother, sister, and all his relations waited on Brummel, and on their knees implored him to save their kinsman's life by the explanation of the mystery. But the beau was obdurate, and Ld miserably perished. When Brummel fled from England, he left this secret a legacy to his country. He wrote on a sheet of paper, on his dressing table, the emphatic words, "Starch is the man." 219 up by a countryman, when he inquires very coolly if t'other blackguard is not quite dead. His amours are more distinguished by their number than attractions, and the first point is not attachment, but notoriety, the lady always being the more desirable in proportion to the known variety of her gallants. That of all the pleasures of this life, there is nothing like a squeeze at court, see plate, or being wedged into a close room at a crowded rout. A ruffian was never thought of by our forefathers. The exquisite was, but he was more sublimated than the exquisite of the 19th century. The dandy is of modern date, but there is some polish on him, suppose it be on his boots alone. Shape and make are attended to by him, witness the Cumberland corset, and his making what he can of every body. Then again, he must have a smattering of French, and affect to be above Old England. When he smokes, he does it from vanity, to show his écume de mer pipe. He may have a gold snuff-box and a little diamond pin, and when he swears, he lisps it out like a baby's lesson. Sometimes, not often, he plays upon the guitar, and the Peninsular War may have made a man of him, and a linguist too. But he is far below the ancient exquisites, who touched the lute, the lyre, and violoncello. And he is an egotist in everything, in gallantry, in conversation, in principle, and in heart. Nor has the deterioration of the gentleman been confined to England only. Polite and ceremonious France has felt her change. The Revolution brought in coarse and uncivilized manners. The awkward and unsuccessful attempt at Spartan and Roman republican manners, the citizen succeeding to monsieur. The blasphemous, incredulous atheistical principles instilled into the then growing generation of all classes. The system of equality, subversive of courtliness, and the obliging attentions and suavities of society, poisoned at once the source 220 of morals and of manners. For there can be nothing gentlemanlike in atheism, radicalism, and the level-ling system. To this state of things succeeded a reign of terror, assassination, and debauchery, and lastly, a military despotism in which the private soldier rose to the marshal's baton. A groom in the stables of the Prince of Condé saw himself ennobled. Peers and generals had brothers still keeping little retail shops, and a drum boy lived to see his wife a washerwoman or fish vendor a duchess, Madame Lefevre. How can we expect breeding from such materials? Bayonets gave brilliancy to the imperial court, and the youth of the country were all soldiers, without dreaming of the gentleman, except in a low bow and flourish of the hat, a greater flourish of self-praise, and a few warm, loose, and dangerous compliments to the fairer sex, became more than even the objects of their passion, but less so of their attentions and prepossessing assiduities. This military race taught us to smoke, to snuff, to drink brandy, and to swear. For although John Bull never was backward in that point, yet St. Giles's and not St. James's was the rendezvous for those who possessed that brutal and invincible habit. These were not amongst the least miseries and curses which the war produced, and they have left such mischievous traces behind them that the mature race in France laugh at the old court and at all old civil and religious principles, whilst our demoralized youth play the same game at home. And if a Bolingbroke or a Chesterfield was now to appear, he would be quizzed by all the smokers, jokers, hoaxers, glasscockers, blacklegs, and fancy fellows of the town, amongst whom all ranks are perfectly lost, and morality is an absolute term. O tempora! O Moses! As the would-be Lady S.C. Collard said, nor does Moses play second best in these characters of the day. Moses has crept into all circles, from the ring to the peerage and baronetage, the stage, the 221 race course, and our clubs are tinged with the Israelitish. They may lend money, but they cannot lend a luster to the court or to the gilded and painted saloons of the beau monde. The style of things is altered. We mean not the old style and new in point of date, but in point of brilliancy in the higher circles. Our ancestors never bumped along the streets with a stable boy by their side in a one-horse machine, which is now the bon ton in imitation of our Gallic neighbors, whose equipage is measured by their purse. Where do you now see a carriage with 6 horses, and 3 outriders, and an avant courier, except on Lord Mayor's day? Yet how common this was with the nobility d'autrefois. 2 grooms are no longer his grace's and my lord's attendants, but each is followed by 1 groom in plain clothes, not very dissimilar from the man he serves. Do we ever see the star of nobility in the morning, to guard him who has a right to it from popular rudeness and a confusion of rank? All is now privacy, concealment, equality in exterior, musty, and meanness. Not that the plain style of dress would be exceptionable, if we could say in verity, we have within what far surpasseth show. but the lining is now no better, oftentimes worse, than the coat. Our principles and our politeness are on a par at low water mark. The tradesman lives like the gentleman, and the nobleman steps down a degree to be, like other people, up to all fashionable habits and modern customs. Whilst the love for gain, at the clubs, on the turf, in the ring, and in private life, debases one part of society and puts down the other, which becomes the pigeon to the rook. Whilst all this goes on, the press chronicles and invents follies for us, and there are men stupid enough to glory in their depravity, to be pleased with their own deformity of mind, body, or dress, of their affectations, and their leading of a party. There is something manly in the yacht club, in A dexterously driving 4 fleet horses in hand, in reining in the proud barb, and in gymnastic exercises. But the whole merit of these ceases, when my lord, like him of carroty beard, becomes the tar without his glory, and wears the check shirt without the heart of oak when the driver becomes the imitator of the stage, and hackney box when the rider is the unsuccessful rival of the jockey. And the frequenter of the gymnastic arena becomes a bruiser, or one turning strength into money, be the bet or the race what it may. Shades of our ancestors, whose fame of old in every time the echoing world has told, whose dauntless valor and heroic deeds each British bosom yet enraptured reads, deeds which in every country, clime, and age have filled the poet's and historian's page, of every muse the theme, and every pen, ye I invoke. And ye, my countrymen, if British blood yet flows within your veins, if for your country aught of love remains, oh make your first, your chief, your only care, that which first raised and made you what you were. CHLTONIN characters. A trip to the SBAS. Chapter 1. Tilde 223, tilde tilde.